The sand burned like fire under Funmi's feet as she kicked off her sandals and ran toward the ocean, but nobody even looked at her. 20 employees in colourful beach clothes stood frozen on the shore like statues, their eyes locked on the horror unfolding in the water. Michael Owen, the youngest billionaire in West Africa, was floating face down in the waves and he wasn't moving. One woman was crying. Another man kept yelling into his phone with shaking hands, but his voice sounded distant and useless. And Funmi, the invisible cleaner that nobody ever noticed, was the only one who seemed able to move her legs. Before we dive into the full story, please subscribe to our channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. We'd love to know how far this story is traveling and grab a popcorn. If you've done that, let's begin. To understand the full story, we must go back to where it all started. The company picnic had been mandatory, which meant she had no choice but to come. They called it a team-building exercise at the luxury beach resort that Michael himself owned, and the invitation said attendance was required. Funmi had almost stayed home because she didn't own a proper swimsuit, and deep down, she knew people like her weren't really part of the team. She was just the woman who emptied their trash bins and mopped their floors. But she'd borrowed an old one-piece from her neighbour, and taken the long bus ride to the coast with the other cleaning staff, hopping to blend into the background like she always did. Now, as she dove into the waves, none of that mattered anymore. The current was so much stronger than she expected, and it pulled at her legs like invisible hands trying to drag her sideways. Her arms burned with each stroke, and salt water filled her mouth and strung her eyes. But she'd grown up swimming in the river back in her village, racing her brothers and diving for stones, so this ocean wouldn't beat her. It couldn't. She reached Michael and flipped his body over with strength she didn't know she had. His face was pale, almost grey, and his eyes were closed. She pressed her fingers to his neck, searching desperately for a pulse, but felt nothing. No breath came from his nose, no movement in his chest. "Help me," she screamed toward the shore as she began pulling him back through the water. "Someone please help." But the executives just stood there, paralyzed by shock and fear and their expensive clothes. Only a few junior employees waded into the shallow water, but none of them dared go deeper. They were too afraid or too shocked or too worried about their careers to risk anything. Funmi's muscles screamed in pain as she dragged Michael through the surf. A massive wave crashed over them and she nearly lost her grip on his body. Salt water rushed into her lungs, and for a moment she thought they would both drown, but she held on. She kicked harder. Finally, her feet touched sand and she pulled him onto the beach with the last of her strength. She checked for a pulse again. Nothing. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears, and her hands were shaking. The free first aid class at the community centre flashed through her mind. The one she'd only attended because they gave out bread and juice afterward. She'd been so hungry that day, and now those lessons might be the only thing standing between Michael and death. "Move back," she shouted at the crowd gathering around them like curious birds. "Give me space." She tilted his head back the way they'd taught her, pinched his nose and sealed her mouth over his. One breath, two breaths. His chest rose and fell with the air she gave him, but he still wasn't breathing on his own. Then she laced her fingers together and pressed hard against his chest, just like the instructor had shown them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. "What is she doing?" someone gasped from the crowd. "Is she kissing him?" another voice whispered, and there was disgust in the tone. Funmi didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Sweat and seawater dripped down her face and mixed with her tears as she counted compressions out loud, her voice growing hoarse. 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. 2 more rescue breaths. Please God, please let this work. Suddenly, rough hands grabbed her shoulders and yanked her backward so hard she almost fell. "Get away from him," a sharp voice commanded, and Funmi knew that voice because everyone in the company knew that voice. She stumbled in the sand, her knees hitting the ground. Standing over her was Victoria Akin, Michael's director of operations and the most feared woman in the entire company. She wore a designer swimsuit cover-up that probably cost more money than Funmi made in 6 months, and her sunglasses were perched on her head like a crown. "What do you think you're doing to Mr. Owen?" Victoria's voice could have cut through steel. "He's not breathing. I'm doing CPR. I was trained." "You're putting your filthy mouth on him." Victoria turned to the crowd with her hands raised like she was performing on a stage. "Someone call an ambulance. Now, this woman is assaulting him." She dropped to her knees beside Michael, positioned her perfectly manicured hands on his chest and began doing compressions. But Funmi could see immediately that Victoria's form was wrong, her rhythm was off, and her hands weren't even in the right place. Still, Victoria made a show of it, her face twisted with dramatic concern that looked more like acting than real fear. "Don't worry, Michael," Victoria said loudly so everyone could hear. "I've got you now, you're going to be okay, I won't let you die." "You're doing it wrong." Funmi tried to push forward, but 2 security guards from the resort suddenly appeared and blocked her path with their bodies. "Ma'am, please step back," one of them said in a flat voice. "But I was saving him. She doesn't know what she's doing, she's going to kill him." "Step back." The guard's hand moved to her arm and his grip was firm and painful. It was a clear warning. Funmi watched helplessly as Victoria continued her terrible compressions, and every second felt like an hour. 10 seconds passed, 20, 30. Michael still wasn't breathing and his lips were turning blue. Then, whether from Funmi's earlier efforts finally taking effect or pure luck or some miracle, Michael's body suddenly convulsed. He coughed violently, and seawater came spewing from his mouth like a fountain. His eyes fluttered open, confused and unfocused. "Michael, oh thank God." Victoria cradled his head in her lap and her voice was dripping with theatrical relief. "I saved you, I brought you back from death." Michael's eyes were still unfocused, and his brain was clearly starved of oxygen because he looked confused and lost. He stared up at Victoria's face hovering above him. "Victoria," he rasped, and his voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, it's me. I pulled you from the ocean and gave you CPR, you're safe now." She stroked his hair like he was a small child. "Just stay still, my dear, the ambulance is coming, I've got you." "You saved me." "Of course I did. I'd never let anything happen to you, Michael, never." Funmi's stomach dropped like a stone into deep water. She opened her mouth to protest, to tell the truth, to scream that Victoria was lying. But Victoria's cold eyes cut to her for just a moment, delivering a silent warning that froze the words in Funmi's throat. That look promised terrible things if Funmi dared to speak. The paramedics arrived within minutes, and they loaded Michael onto a stretcher while checking his vitals and putting an oxygen mask over his face. He was weak but alive, and his colour was slowly returning. As they wheeled him toward the ambulance, he reached out and grabbed Victoria's hand with trembling fingers. "Thank you," he whispered, and there were tears in his eyes. "You saved my life." Victoria smiled, and it was a sharp, triumphant smile that made Funmi's blood run cold. "Anything for you, Michael, anything at all." She climbed into the ambulance with him like she had every right to be there, and the doors slammed shut. The ambulance pulled away with its sirens wailing, leaving the stunned employees standing on the beach in silence. Funmi stood there dripping wet and shaking, her body still trembling from exhaustion and shock. Her co-worker Maria touched her shoulder gently and whispered close to her ear. "We saw what you did," Maria said quietly. "We know you're the one who saved him." But most of the crowd was already dispersing, walking back toward the resort and murmuring to each other about Victoria's heroic rescue, about how devoted she was to Michael, about how lucky he was to have someone like her on his team, about how she'd risked everything to save his life. Nobody mentioned the cleaner who'd actually risked her life to pull him from the ocean. Nobody said Funmi's name at all. Was this the beginning of justice, or the start of something far more sinister? Victoria's smile held secrets that would destroy everything Funmi had left. The company-wide email arrived at 8 o'clock in the morning, and Funmi read it on her phone while standing at the bus stop in the early heat. Her hands shook as she read the words once, then twice, then 3 times, and each time she felt sicker. Thanks to the quick thinking and bravery of our Director of Operations, Victoria Akin, our CEO Michael Owen survived a near-drowning incident yesterday. Victoria's heroic actions and CPR training saved his life. Please join us in celebrating her courage and dedication. A special recognition ceremony will be held this Friday at the main office. Attendance is mandatory for all staff. Funmi wanted to throw her phone into the street and watch it shatter into 1,000 pieces. Instead, she slipped it back into her worn bag and climbed onto the crowded bus, feeling like her chest was being crushed by an invisible weight. When she arrived at work and pushed through the glass doors of Owen Industries, the entire building was buzzing with energy like a disturbed beehive. Everywhere she looked, people were talking about Victoria the hero. Posters were being hung in the lobby showing Victoria's professional headshot with the word hero printed underneath in bold letters. A news crew was setting up cameras and lights near the reception desk, and their equipment was scattered everywhere. Victoria herself was standing in front of the cameras in her perfectly pressed grey suit, modestly describing how she'd just done what anyone would do in that situation. "I didn't think about my own safety," Victoria was saying to the reporter with a humble smile. "I just knew I had to save him. Michael means everything to this company and I couldn't let him die." The reporter nodded eagerly and scribbled notes. And you have formal CPR training? Yes, I took a course years ago. I never thought I'd actually use it, but I'm so grateful I did. It's so important for everyone to learn these life-saving skills. Victoria's voice was smooth and practiced, and she looked directly into the camera. You never know when you might need to save someone's life. Funmi felt bile rise in her throat, but she turned away and pushed her cleaning cart toward the elevators. Nobody even glanced at her. She was invisible, just like always. On the 20th floor, she cleaned the executive bathrooms and emptied trash bins while listening to people gossip in the hallways. Everyone was talking about Victoria's bravery and Michael's lucky escape and the upcoming ceremony. Some people were even crying tears of joy because their beloved CEO had survived. Can you imagine if we'd lost him? One woman said to her colleague. This company would fall apart without Michael. Thank God for Victoria, she's amazing. I heard she dove into the water without even thinking about the danger. Funmi scrubbed the toilet harder than necessary and tried to block out their voices. That afternoon, she was called to the Human Resources office on the 15th floor. The woman behind the desk was named Mrs. Rose, and she looked at Funmi with barely concealed disgust, like she was something dirty that had been dragged in from the street. We need to discuss your behavior at the company picnic, Mrs. Rose said coldly. My behavior, Funmi's voice came out smaller than she wanted. Multiple witnesses reported that you inappropriately touched Mr. Owen while he was unconscious on the beach, that you put your mouth on him without permission. Mrs. Rose folded her hands on the desk like a judge delivering a sentence. Funmi's blood ran cold and her heart started racing. I was giving him CPR. He wasn't breathing, he was dying, so I... Ms. Akin has filed a formal complaint against you. Mrs. Rose slid a white envelope across the desk, and it seemed to move in slow motion. She says you pushed her aside and assaulted Mr. Owen while he was vulnerable and unconscious. The optics are very concerning for the company. We cannot have employees who take advantage of unconscious people, especially not our CEO. What? Funmi's voice cracked and tears started burning in her eyes. I saved his life. I pulled him from the ocean. I gave him CPR. He wasn't breathing. Ms. Akin saved his life. She's the one Mr. Owen himself thanked. She's the hero here, not you. Mrs. Rose's eyes were flat and uncaring, like she was talking about throwing away garbage. We're terminating your employment effective immediately. You have 1 hour to collect your personal belongings and leave the premises. This isn't fair. Funmi stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. I'm telling the truth. Ask Maria, ask the other cleaners, they saw everything. Ms. Akin is a senior executive with an impeccable record. You're a cleaner with no formal training who admits to putting your mouth on an unconscious man. Who do you think people will believe? Mrs. Rose picked up her phone. Security will escort you out. And Ms. Williams, you're lucky we're not pressing charges for assault. I suggest you leave quietly and be grateful for that small mercy. Funmi wanted to scream. She wanted to flip the desk over and make them see the truth. She wanted to grab Mrs. Rose by her expensive blazer and shake her until she listened. But what good would that do? She was just a cleaner, and Victoria Akin was powerful, rich and respected. Who would ever believe her word against Victoria's? The security guard appeared at the door, and he was the same one from the beach. He looked uncomfortable but determined. Ma'am, let's go, he said quietly. Funmi's hands were shaking as she walked through the building one last time. She collected her spare uniform from her locker in the basement and the small photo of her daughter that she kept taped inside. The other cleaners watched with sad eyes but said nothing. They were too afraid for their own jobs. The security guard walked her through the lobby just as the news crew was filming another segment. Victoria was mid-interview, describing her harrowing rescue in dramatic detail. The waves were so strong, Victoria was saying with emotion in her voice. But I fought through them because I knew Michael needed me. When I finally got him to shore and started CPR, I honestly wasn't sure if I could bring him back. But I didn't give up. I kept going until he finally breathed again. Funmi's and Victoria's eyes met for one brief second across the crowded lobby. Victoria's smile was pure poison, and her eyes gleamed with triumph. The security guard guided Funmi out through the glass doors and into the afternoon heat. Behind her, she could hear applause from inside the building as Victoria finished her interview. Could the truth ever fight its way through such powerful lies? The answer would cost Funmi everything she had left. Funmi couldn't find work anywhere, and the rejections came faster and harder with each passing day. She applied to cleaning companies all over Lagos, from the big professional ones in Victoria Island to the small family operations in Surulere. But the rumours had spread through the city like wildfire, burning her reputation to ashes. The cleaner who assaulted the unconscious billionaire, the the woman who took advantage of Michael Owen while he was helpless. The story grew worse with each retelling, becoming more twisted and more ugly. Companies wouldn't even let her finish filling out her applications before they were shaking their heads and showing her the door. One manager actually laughed in her face and asked if she thought he was stupid enough to hire someone like her. Another woman called security the moment Funmi walked into the building, saying she didn't want trouble. "Please," Funmi begged at an office building in Aikja. "Just let me explain what really happened. I saved him. I pulled him from the ocean and gave him CPR. Victoria Akin is lying." The hiring manager, a tired-looking man with grey hair, sighed and closed her file. "Look, I feel for you. But even if you're telling the truth, which I'm not saying you are, it doesn't matter. Victoria Akin is powerful and Michael Owen is powerful and you're nobody. Fighting them is like trying to stop rain with your bare hands. My advice, find a different line of work. Maybe leave Lagos entirely." "I have a daughter," Funmi whispered, and tears started rolling down her cheeks. "She's 12 years old. I need to work. I need to feed her." "Then you should have thought about that before you touched a billionaire." The man stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. "I'm sorry, but I can't help you." 3 weeks passed, and Funmi's savings disappeared like water through her fingers. She couldn't pay her rent, and her landlord started making threats about throwing her and her daughter Grace out onto the street. She couldn't pay for Grace's school fees, and the school sent home a letter saying Grace would be expelled if payment wasn't received by the end of the month. She could barely afford to buy food, and some nights they went to bed hungry because there was nothing in the house except half a bag of rice and some palm oil. Grace asked questions that broke Funmi's heart into smaller and smaller pieces. "Mama, why did you lose your job? Mama, when can I go back to school? Mama, why are you crying?" Funmi tried to hide her tears and smile, but it got harder every day. She felt like she was drowning again, except this time there was no shore to reach, just darkness and water pulling her down. One evening, Maria from the cleaning staff came to visit her in their small room in Agegunnel. Maria brought a bag of rice and some chicken, and Funmi almost cried from gratitude because they hadn't eaten meat in 2 weeks. "I'm so sorry," Maria said as they sat on the thin mattress that served as both bed and couch. "We all know what really happened. We saw you save him." "Then why won't anyone speak up?" Funmi's voice was bitter and tired. "Why won't anyone tell the truth?" Maria looked down at her hands. "Because Victoria threatened us. She called a meeting with all the cleaning staff the day after the beach incident. She said anyone who spreads false rumors about her would be fired and blacklisted from every company in Lagos. She said she has connections everywhere and she would make sure we'd never work again." Maria's voice dropped to a whisper. "She said she'd do to us what she did to you, but worse. We have families too, Funmi. We have children to feed." "I'm so sorry, but we can't help you." Funmi nodded slowly because she understood, even though it hurt. "It's okay, I don't blame you." "There's something else," Maria said, and her voice sounded nervous. "Victoria got a huge promotion. Michael made her his chief operating officer because he's so grateful that she saved his life. She's the second most powerful person in the company now. And there are rumors that she and Michael are getting closer. People say they've been seen having private dinners together. Some people think they might start dating soon." Funmi felt sick to her stomach. Victoria wasn't just a thief of glory. She was building an empire on stolen heroism, and Michael was too blind to see it. "I also heard," Maria continued quietly, "that Michael has been having strange symptoms since the drowning. Headaches, dizziness, memory problems. The doctors can't figure out what's wrong. But he trusts Victoria completely now. She's always by his side, always taking care of him." Something cold crawled up Funmi's spine. "What kind of memory problems?" "He can't remember parts of the drowning. He can't remember how he ended up in the water in the first place. The doctors say it's normal after oxygen deprivation, but it's getting worse." "Not better." After Maria left, Funmi lay awake in the darkness while Grace slept beside her. She thought about Michael's pale face in the water. She thought about Victoria's poisonous smile. She thought about the way Victoria had positioned herself as the hero so quickly, so smoothly, like she'd been ready for it. A terrible thought began to form in Funmi's mind, and once it was there, she couldn't shake it loose. What if Victoria had planned the whole thing? What if she'd somehow caused Michael to nearly drown so she could swoop in and play the hero? It sounded crazy, like something from a movie, but Victoria was ruthless and ambitious and cruel. And now she was in the perfect position to control Michael while he was weak and confused and grateful. Funmi sat up in the darkness, her heart pounding. She had no proof. She had no evidence. She had nothing except a gut feeling and the memory of Victoria's triumphant smile. But what if she was right? The next morning, Funmi made a decision. She couldn't find work and she couldn't prove the truth about the drowning, but she could watch. She could investigate. She could find out what Victoria was really doing. She borrowed money from a neighbor and bought a cheap phone with internet access. Then she started researching everything she could find about Victoria Akin and Michael Owen. She read old news articles and company press releases and social media posts. She learned that Victoria had worked for Michael for 5 years and had risen through the ranks quickly, faster than anyone else in company history. She learned that Victoria had been married once, but her husband had died in a mysterious car accident 3 years ago, and she'd inherited his considerable fortune. Funmi also learned that there had been another executive at Owen Industries, a man named David Rose, who was supposed to become COO. But David had suddenly resigned 2 months ago, citing personal reasons. Nobody knew where he'd gone. The more Funmi dug, the more pieces she found that didn't quite fit together. And at the center of it all was Victoria Akin, smiling her perfect smile and climbing higher and higher. Late one night, Funmi created a fake social media account and sent a message to David Rose. She knew it was a long shot, but she had to try. "My name is Funmi. I used to work at Owen Industries. I need to talk to you about Victoria Akin. Please, it's important." She hit send and waited, not expecting any response. But 3 hours later, her phone buzzed with a reply that made her heart stop. "Meet me tomorrow, come alone, I'll tell you everything, but you have to promise me you'll be careful. Victoria is more dangerous than you can possibly imagine." Had Funmi just found an ally in her fight for truth, or had she walked straight into a trap? The meeting would reveal secrets that changed everything. David Rose looked nothing like Funmi expected. In the company photos she'd found online, he'd been a confident man in expensive suits with a bright smile and styled hair. But the man sitting across from her in the dingy cafe in Aja was thin and nervous, with dark circles under his eyes and hands that wouldn't stop shaking. He kept glancing at the door like he expected someone terrible to walk through it at any moment. "Thank you for meeting me," Funmi said quietly. They were sitting at a corner table far from the windows, and David had insisted on that location. "I know this must be difficult." "You have no idea," David whispered, and his voice was hoarse like he'd been screaming. "You have absolutely no idea what Victoria is capable of. I thought I knew, but I was wrong. I was so wrong." He took a long drink of his coffee, and Funmi noticed his hands trembling so badly that liquid sloshed over the rim. "Tell me everything," Funmi said. "Please, I need to understand what's happening." David looked around the cafe one more time before he started talking, and his voice was barely above a whisper. "I was supposed to be promoted to Chief Operating Officer 6 months ago. Michael promised me. I'd worked for him for 8 years and I'd earned it. But then Victoria started getting close to Michael. She'd stay late at the office with him. She'd bring him coffee and lunch. She'd laugh at his jokes and ask his advice about everything. At first, I thought she was just being friendly, but then I realized she was positioning herself. Positioning herself for what? For power, for control. Victoria doesn't just want a job or a title, she wants everything." David's eyes were haunted. "She started sabotaging my projects. Little things at first, files would go missing, reports would have errors that I knew weren't there when I submitted them. Clients would suddenly have complaints about me that made no sense. And every time something went wrong, Victoria would be there to fix it and make herself look good." Funmi leaned forward. "Did you tell Michael?" "I tried, but Victoria was always one step ahead. She made it look like I was paranoid or jealous or unstable. She'd be so sympathetic, telling Michael that I was under a lot of stress and maybe I needed a break. She was so smooth about it, so subtle. Before I knew what was happening, Michael started doubting me." "What made you finally leave?" David's face went pale and he stared down at his coffee cup. 3 months ago, I was driving home late at night. A car came out of nowhere and tried to run me off the road. I swerved and almost crashed into a barrier. I thought it was just a drunk driver or a carjacker. But then it happened again the next week. And the week after that, someone was trying to kill me, Funmi. Someone wanted me dead." Funmi's blood ran cold. "Did you go to the police?" "And tell them what? That I suspected my co-worker was trying to murder me. I had no proof. The cars were always different. The drivers always wore masks or hats that covered their faces. The police would have thought I was crazy." He laughed, but it was a hollow sound with no humor in it. "Maybe I am crazy. Maybe I'm making all of this up because I'm bitter about not getting promoted. That's what Victoria would say." "I don't think you're crazy," Funmi said firmly. "Victoria stole credit for saving Michael's life. She had me fired and destroyed my reputation over a lie. She threatened everyone who might tell the truth. I believe every word you're saying." David looked at her with grateful eyes. "After the 3rd attempt on my life, I went to Michael's house to warn him. I told him Victoria was dangerous. I told him he needed to be careful around her, but he didn't believe me. He said I was jealous and unstable, just like Victoria had told him. He suggested I take a leave of absence for my mental health." David's voice broke. "So I quit. I took what money I had and I left Lagos." I've been hiding ever since, waiting for Victoria to send someone to finish what they started. Why didn't you leave Nigeria completely? Because I need to stop her before she destroys Michael too. He's a good man, Funmi, arrogant sometimes and blind to certain things, but good. He built that company from nothing and he treats his employees well. He doesn't deserve what Victoria is planning for him. Funmi's heart started racing. What is she planning? David leaned in even closer and his voice dropped to barely a whisper. I don't have proof of this, but I think Victoria wants to marry Michael and then kill him. She did it before with her first husband, Thomas. I looked into it after the driving incidents. Thomas Akin died in a car accident 3 years ago, but the police report was suspicious. The brakes failed at exactly the wrong moment on exactly the wrong curve. Victoria inherited everything, including his shares in several companies. She became rich overnight. And you think she wants to do the same thing to Michael? I think the drowning was her first attempt. Think about it, Funmi. Michael is an excellent swimmer. He grew up surfing and diving. How does a man like that nearly drown in calm waters at a beach? It doesn't make sense unless someone drugged him or did something to make him weak. Funmi remembered Michael's pale face and his glassy eyes. She remembered how confused he'd been, how he couldn't seem to focus or understand what was happening. At the time, she'd thought it was just oxygen deprivation, but what if David was right? Victoria planned the whole thing, Funmi said slowly as the pieces came together in her mind. She somehow made Michael weak or dizzy so he'd get into trouble in the water. Then she waited for someone else to save him so she could swoop in and take credit. She knew nobody would believe a cleaner's word against hers. Exactly, and now she's the hero. Now Michael trusts her completely and depends on her. She's probably been giving him something to make his memory problems worse, keeping him confused and grateful. It's the perfect setup. David rubbed his face with shaking hands. The next step will be marriage. Then Michael will have an unfortunate accident just like Thomas did, and Victoria will inherit billions. We have to warn him, Funmi said. We have to make him see the truth. How he wouldn't listen to me and he doesn't even know you exist anymore. Victoria has made sure of that, and we have no proof, just suspicions and theories. Victoria is too smart to leave evidence lying around. They sat in silence for a long moment, both feeling the weight of helplessness. Then Funmi's phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced at it and her eyes widened. What is it? David asked. It's a news alert. Michael and Victoria just announced their engagement. The wedding is scheduled for 3 months from now. David's face went white as paper. Oh God, we're running out of time. Funmi stared at the photo on her phone screen. Michael and Victoria were standing together in formal clothes, smiling for the camera. Victoria's hand was resting on Michael's arm possessively, and she wore a diamond ring that caught the light. Michael looked happy, but also tired and somehow diminished, like a shadow of the confident billionaire he used to be. There has to be a way to stop her, Funmi whispered. There has to be evidence somewhere. People like Victoria always make mistakes eventually. They get too confident. Maybe, David said, but he didn't sound hopeful. Or maybe Victoria is the exception. Maybe she's the one who gets away with everything. Funmi looked at him with fierce determination burning in her chest. I didn't risk my life to save Michael just so he could be murdered by a snake in expensive clothes. I'm going to find proof. I'm going to expose Victoria for what she really is. How? You don't even have a job. You can't get near the company or Michael. I'll find a way, Funmi said. I have to. Could a cleaner and a broken executive really bring down one of the most powerful women in Lagos? The answer would require courage that neither of them knew they possessed. Funmi and David met 3 more times over the next 2 weeks, always in different locations and always being careful not to be followed. They were both paranoid now, both looking over their shoulders constantly and jumping at shadows. But slowly, carefully, they began to form a plan. Victoria has to be keeping records, David said during their meeting at a park in Lekki. They were pretending to be strangers sitting on separate benches, but they were close enough to talk quietly. People like her are obsessed with control. She probably has files on everyone she's manipulated or blackmailed. Evidence of her plans, something we can use. But how do we get access to her files? Funmi asked. She lives in a mansion with security systems. She works in an office I'm banned from. I can't exactly walk up and ask to borrow her laptop. David was quiet for a long moment, thinking hard. Then his eyes lit up with an idea that was either brilliant or completely insane. What if you could get back into the building? Not as yourself, but as someone else. What do you mean? Victoria destroyed your reputation as Funmi Williams, but what if you became someone new? A different person with a different name and a different background. The cleaning company that Owen Industries uses is always hiring because the turnover is high. Nobody pays attention to cleaners anyway. You could get hired under a fake name and get access to the building again. Funmi's heart started beating faster. It was risky and possibly illegal, but it might actually work. I'd need fake identification, a fake work history, references that can't be traced back to me. I can help with that, David said. I still have connections with people who owe me favors. It'll take some money and some time, but we can create a new identity for you, something clean that will pass a basic background check. And once I'm inside, you get access to Victoria's office. You find her files or her computer. You copy everything you can and bring it to me. We find proof of what she did to her husband, proof of what she's doing to Michael, proof of everything. Then we go to the police and the media at the same time so Victoria can't cover it up. It sounded simple when David said it like that, but Funmi knew nothing about this would be simple. Victoria was smart and careful and ruthless. One wrong move and Funmi would end up like David, running for her life or worse. But what choice did she have? She couldn't find other work. She couldn't pay her rent. Grace had been expelled from school 2 days ago, and now she spent her days sitting in their tiny room while other children learned and played. Funmi was drowning in poverty and despair, and fighting Victoria was the only rope she could see. Okay, Funmi said finally, let's do it, let's create a new me. Over the next 3 weeks, David worked his connections and called in favors. He found someone who could create fake identification cards and fake work documents that looked authentic. They created a new identity for Funmi. Her new name was Grace Okafor, which made Funmi smile sadly because she was naming herself after her daughter. Grace Okafor had worked as a cleaner in Port Harcourt for 5 years before moving to Lagos to find better opportunities. She had references from companies that David's friend had created fake records for, complete with phone numbers that would ring to people who were paid to confirm Grace Okafor's excellent work history. It cost most of the money David had left, and Funmi felt guilty about that, but David insisted. This isn't just about you anymore, he said. This is about stopping a murderer before she kills again. Michael's life is worth more than money. Funmi practiced being Grace Okafor until she could do it without thinking. She changed her hair, wearing it pulled back tight instead of in her usual loose style. She borrowed clothes from Maria that looked different from what she used to wear. She practiced speaking with a slightly different accent, mixing in phrases from Port Harcourt that she remembered from friends who'd lived there. She became a different person, and it felt strange and frightening and somehow liberating all at the same time. The hardest part was explaining everything to her daughter, the real Grace. "Mama, I don't understand," 12-year-old Grace said, confusion written all over her face. "Why do you have to pretend to be someone else? Why can't you just tell the truth about what happened?" Funmi held her daughter's hands and looked into her eyes. Because sometimes in this world, the truth isn't enough. Sometimes powerful people can make lies seem like truth. And they can make the truth seem like lies. The woman who lied about saving Mr. Owen is very powerful, and she's dangerous. If I fight her as myself, as Funmi, she'll destroy me completely. But if I fight her as someone new, someone she doesn't know about, maybe I can win. And then we can go back to normal, Funmi promised, even though she wasn't sure if normal would ever exist for them again. You'll go back to school, and I'll find a good job, and everything will be okay. Grace hugged her tightly. "Be careful, Mama, I need you." "I will be, I promise." 4 weeks after losing her job, Funmi walked into the offices of Clean Solutions Limited using her new identity. The manager, a tired woman named Mrs. Ademi, barely looked at her fake identification before nodding. "We're always short-staffed," Mrs. Ademi said while filling out paperwork. "You'll be assigned to various corporate buildings around Victoria Island. The pay is minimum wage, the hours are long and the work is hard. Can you handle that?" "Yes, ma'am," Funmi said in her Grace Okafor voice. "I need the work." "Good, you start Monday. We'll give you your assignments then." Funmi waited anxiously through the weekend, barely sleeping. On Monday morning, she reported to Clean Solutions and received her assignment sheet. Her heart nearly stopped when she saw the words printed at the top. Owen Industries, floors 1522. She was going back into the building where Victoria had destroyed her. Back into the place where Michael Owen worked, where he was slowly being poisoned by Victoria's manipulation and possibly by actual poison too. She would be invisible again, just another cleaner that nobody noticed, but this time she would use that invisibility as a weapon. Her first day back was surreal. She pushed her cleaning cart through the familiar hallways, but nobody recognized her. Why would they? She was just another cleaner with a different name and a slightly different face. The executives walked past her without a glance, talking on their phones and carrying their expensive coffee cups. She cleaned the 20th floor carefully, listening to every conversation she could overhear. People were still talking about Victoria and Michael's engagement, about how romantic it was that they'd fallen in love after she'd saved his life. about how beautiful the wedding would be, about how perfect they were together. Funmi wanted to scream at them that it was all lies, but she kept her head down and her mouth shut. On her third day, she finally saw Michael. He was walking through the 20th floor hallway with Victoria at his side, and Funmi's heart clenched at how different he looked. He'd lost weight, and his skin had a greyish tinge that hadn't been there before. He moved slowly, like an old man instead of a young billionaire. Victoria held his arm, guiding him gently, her face arranged in an expression of loving concern. "Are you sure you don't want to go home and rest?" Victoria was saying. "You look tired, darling." "I'm fine," Michael said, but his voice was weak. "I just need more coffee." "I'll get you some. The special blend from my office, the one that helps with your headaches." Funmi's stomach turned. The special blend, was that how Victoria was doing it? Was she putting something in Michael's coffee to keep him sick and confused? She watched them disappear into the executive suite, and her hands tightened on her cleaning cart handle. She needed to get into Victoria's office somehow. She needed to find proof. But Victoria's office was always locked, and Victoria was paranoid about security. There were cameras in the hallways and keycard access for the executive suite. Getting in would be almost impossible for a cleaner with no authorization. Unless Funmi could find another way. That night, she met David at a different cafe and told him what she'd seen. "Victoria is definitely giving Michael something. I heard her mention a special coffee blend. That has to be it." "We need a sample," David said immediately. "If we can get a sample of whatever she's giving him and have it tested, that's proof. That's evidence that will hold up in court." "How am I supposed to get a sample? I can't just walk into her office and take her coffee." "Maybe you don't need to go into her office. Maybe you can get it from Michael's office instead. He has to have some of that coffee there, right? And his office might be easier to access." Funmi thought about it. Michael's office was also in the executive suite, but there were times when he left for meetings, and the door stayed unlocked for assistants to go in and out. If she timed it right, if she was careful and lucky, she might be able to slip in for just a minute. "It's risky," she said. "Everything about this plan is risky, but we're running out of time. The wedding is in 2 months now. Once Victoria marries Michael, she'll have access to everything. She'll probably move faster after that." Funmi knew he was right. They were running out of time, and Michael was running out of time, and she was the only one who could save him because nobody else could see what Victoria really was. "Okay," she said, "I'll try tomorrow." The next day, Funmi cleaned the 20th floor with her heart pounding in her chest. She watched Michael's office carefully, waiting for the right moment. At 2 o'clock, Michael left for a board meeting with Victoria at his side. His assistant left 5 minutes later to run an errand. The hallway was empty. Funmi took a deep breath and walked toward Michael's office with her cleaning cart like she had every right to be there. The door was unlocked, just as she'd hoped. She slipped inside and closed the door behind her. Michael's office was enormous and beautiful, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lagos. But Funmi didn't have time to admire the view. She went straight to his desk where a coffee maker sat on a side table. Next to it was a glass jar labelled Victoria's Special Blend in elegant handwriting. Funmi's hands shook as she opened the jar and smelled the coffee inside. It smelled normal, like expensive coffee beans. But she knew Victoria was too smart to use something obvious. Whatever she was using would be subtle, mixed in so well that nobody would notice. She pulled a small plastic bag from her pocket, one of the sandwich bags she'd brought from home, and carefully scooped some of the coffee into it. She was sealing the bag when she heard voices in the hallway outside. Her heart stopped. The voices were getting closer. One of them was Victoria's. Had Funmi just made a fatal mistake that would cost her everything? The next 60 seconds would determine if she lived or died. Funmi's mind went blank with pure terror for one horrible second, and then her survival instincts kicked in hard. She shoved the plastic bag of coffee into her cleaning cart under a pile of used rags, grabbed a bottle of furniture polish, and started spraying Michael's desk like she'd been cleaning it all along. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped the bottle, but she forced herself to move naturally and breathe normally, even though her heart was trying to break through her ribs. The door opened. Victoria walked in first, with Michael following behind her slowly, and they were both talking about something related to the board meeting. Funmi kept her head down and kept cleaning, playing the part of the invisible cleaner who didn't matter and didn't exist. "Oh, I didn't realize cleaning was scheduled for now," Victoria said, and her voice was sharp and suspicious. Funmi made herself look up with a confused expression on her face. "I'm sorry, ma'am. They told me to clean all the executive offices before 3 o'clock. Should I come back later?" Victoria's eyes narrowed as she studied Funmi's face, and for one terrible moment, Funmi was sure that Victoria recognized her. That somehow Victoria could see through the different hair and the different name and the different accent straight to the woman she'd destroyed. But then Michael spoke, and his voice was tired and irritated. "Just let her finish, Victoria, I need to sit down. My head is killing me." "Of course, darling." Victoria's attention shifted to Michael immediately, and the suspicion melted from her face like it had never been there. "Come sit. I'll make you some of the special coffee. That always helps." Funmi's stomach clenched as she watched Victoria walk to the coffee maker and start preparing a cup. She wanted to knock it out of Victoria's hands and scream at Michael to stop drinking poison, but all she could do was keep polishing the desk and pray that Victoria didn't notice anything missing from the jar. Michael sank into his leather chair like an old man, and he closed his eyes. "I don't understand why these headaches keep getting worse. The doctors can't find anything wrong." "Because there's nothing physically wrong, sweetheart. It's stress and trauma from the drowning. You nearly died." Victoria brought him the coffee and perched on the edge of his desk, her hand stroking his hair gently. "Your brain needs time to heal. These things take time, but I'm here to take care of you. I'll always take care of you." "I know, I don't know what I'd do without you." Michael took a long drink of the coffee, and Funmi felt sick watching him swallow the poison that Victoria was feeding him. "You'll never have to find out," Victoria said, and her smile was soft and loving and completely fake. "We're going to be married soon, and then I'll take care of you forever." Funmi finished cleaning the desk and moved to the windows, working as quickly as she dared. She needed to get out of this office before Victoria started asking more questions or before she did something stupid that would blow her cover. "Victoria," Michael said suddenly, and there was confusion in his voice. "Something's been bothering me. I keep having these dreams, or maybe they're memories, I can't tell, about the drowning." Victoria's hand stilled in his hair for just a second before she continued stroking. "What kind of dreams?" "I remember being in the water and feeling so weak like I couldn't move my arms properly. And I remember a woman's face, not yours, someone else, someone with kind eyes who was crying." Michael's forehead creased with effort as he tried to remember. Who was she? Funmi froze at the window with her back to them, barely breathing. "That was probably just a hallucination, darling. Your brain was starved of oxygen. It creates false memories sometimes." Victoria's voice was calm and soothing, but there was steel underneath. "I was the only one who touched you that day. I pulled you from the water and saved your life. Everyone saw it." I know that's what happened, but the dreams feel so real." "Dreams often do, but you need to trust the facts, not the dreams. I saved you, Michael, only me." Victoria leaned down and kissed his forehead. "Now drink your coffee and rest, you're working too hard." Funmi finished the windows and pushed her cart toward the door, desperate to escape. But just as she reached for the handle, Victoria's voice stopped her cold. "Wait." Funmi turned slowly, and Victoria was staring at her with those cold, calculating eyes. "What's your name?" Victoria asked. "Grace, ma'am, Grace Okafor." "How long have you been working here, Grace?" "Just this week, ma'am. I'm new with Clean Solutions." Victoria stood up and walked toward Funmi slowly, like a cat stalking prey. She circled around the cleaning cart, looking at it carefully, and Funmi's heart was beating so fast she thought she might faint. "You look familiar," Victoria said quietly. "Have we met before?" "No, ma'am. I just moved to Lagos from Port Harcourt. I've never seen you before." Funmi kept her voice steady even though she wanted to run screaming from the room. Victoria reached out and touched Funmi's face, tilting her chin up so their eyes met. Her fingers were cold and strong, and her gaze was like a knife cutting into Funmi's skull. "Strange," Victoria whispered. "I could swear I know you from somewhere." "Maybe I just have one of those faces, ma'am." Funmi pulled back gently, trying not to seem scared or suspicious. "I should go. I have other offices to clean." For a long, terrible moment, Victoria didn't move. Then she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, don't let me keep you from your work." Funmi walked out of that office using every ounce of control she had to keep from running. She pushed her cart down the hallway with steady steps, even though her legs felt like water and her lungs couldn't seem to get enough air. She made it to the service elevator and pressed the button with shaking fingers. Only when the elevator doors closed and she was alone did she let herself collapse against the wall, gasping for breath like she'd just run a marathon. The plastic bag of coffee was still hidden in her cart, and she'd gotten away with it, but that had been too close. Way too close. Victoria suspected something, maybe not the full truth yet, but something had triggered her instincts, and Victoria's instincts were sharp and deadly. That evening, Funmi met David in a parking garage in Aja where they were unlikely to be seen. She handed him the plastic bag of coffee like it was made of gold. "This is it," she said. "This is what Victoria gives to Michael for his headaches. I heard her call it her special blend." David held the bag up to the light, examining the coffee beans. "I have a friend who works in a private lab. He owes me a favor. I'll get this tested tomorrow and have results in a few days. Victoria almost recognized me today, Funmi said, and her voice shook with leftover fear. She stared at my face and said I looked familiar. I don't think I can go back to that building, David. It's too dangerous. You might be right. Maybe you've done enough. Once we get the test results and prove the coffee is poisoned, we can go to the police. Will they believe us? We're nobody. Victoria is powerful and rich and engaged to Michael Owen. What if she finds a way to explain it away? We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. For now, let's just get the proof we need. 3 days later, David called Funmi in the middle of the night. His voice was shaking with excitement and fear. I got the test results. You were right, Funmi. The coffee is laced with something called thallium. It's a poison that causes headaches, confusion, memory loss, and eventually death if given in regular doses. It's almost impossible to detect unless you're specifically testing for it. Victoria has been slowly poisoning Michael for months. Funmi felt vindicated and terrified all at once. We have proof now, we can stop her. I'm taking this to the police tomorrow morning. I'm also sending copies to several journalists. Victoria won't be able to cover this up. Be careful, David, she's dangerous. I know, but we're so close now. By tomorrow night, Victoria will be in handcuffs and Michael will be safe. Funmi hung up the phone and lay down next to her sleeping daughter, feeling hope for the first time in weeks. They'd done it. They'd found the proof. Victoria's reign of lies was about to end. But at 3 a.m, her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She answered it groggily. Funmi Williams, a cold, familiar voice said, and Funmi's blood turned to ice. Or should I call you Grace Okafor? Such a clever disguise, it almost fooled me. Victoria, Funmi whispered. I've been watching you for days, waiting to see what you'd do. I knew there was something wrong about you the moment I saw your face in Michael's office. And tonight I had you followed. Victoria's voice was calm and pleasant, like they were discussing the weather. You met with David Rose in a parking garage. David, who I thought had finally learned his lesson and left Lagos for good. But apparently cockroaches always come back. Funmi sat up, her heart racing. We have proof. We know you've been poisoning Michael. The police will have the evidence by tomorrow. Oh, I don't think so. Victoria laughed softly. You see, David won't be going to the police tomorrow. David won't be going anywhere ever again. There was a terrible car accident about 20 minutes ago. A truck driver fell asleep at the wheel and crashed right into David's car. Such a tragedy. He died instantly. No, Funmi breathed. No, you didn't. I did, and I have the coffee sample back now too. My people were very thorough, so you have no proof, no witness, and no way to stop me. Victoria's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Here's what's going to happen, Funmi. You're going to disappear. You're going to take your daughter and leave Lagos tonight. If you ever come back, if you ever try to contact Michael or speak to the police or tell anyone about this conversation, I will kill your daughter first and make you watch. Then I'll kill you slowly, do you understand? Tears were streaming down Funmi's face. Why are you doing this? Why do you need to hurt so many people? Because I can, because I'm smarter than everyone else and I deserve everything I take. Michael will marry me and then he'll have an unfortunate accident and I'll inherit billions, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Victoria paused. You have 2 hours to leave Lagos. I'll be watching. Don't make me come find you. The line went dead. Funmi sat in the darkness, shaking and crying and feeling like the world had collapsed around her. David was dead. The proof was gone. Victoria had won. Was this truly the end, or did Funmi have one final card to play? The answer would require a sacrifice that might cost her soul. Funmi didn't run. Every logical part of her brain screamed at her to grab Grace and flee Lagos before Victoria made good on her threats, but she couldn't do it. She couldn't let Victoria win, she couldn't let Michael die, and she couldn't let David's death mean nothing. So instead of running, Funmi did something desperate and probably insane. She went to see Michael's mother. Evelyn Owen lived in a beautiful house in Ikoyi, far from the skyscrapers and business dealings of her son's empire. Funmi showed up at 7 in the morning without an appointment, and the security guard at the gate tried to turn her away. Please, Funmi begged, tell Mrs. Owen that I have information about her son's life being in danger. Tell her it's about Victoria Akin. Tell her I'm the woman who actually saved Michael from drowning, please. Maybe it was the desperation in her voice, or maybe the guard saw something in her eyes that made him believe her, but he made the call. 10 minutes later, Funmi was sitting in Evelyn Owen's elegant living room, drinking tea from a china cup that probably cost more than her monthly rent used to be. Evelyn was a dignified woman in her 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes and silver hair. She studied Funmi carefully before speaking. The guard said you claim to have saved my son from drowning, but the news says Victoria Akin saved him. The news is lying, Mrs. Owen. Victoria is lying, and if you don't help me, your son is going to die. Funmi set down her teacup with shaking hands. I know how this sounds. I know I'm nobody and Victoria is powerful and respected, but please, please just listen to what I have to say. Michael's life depends on it. Something in Funmi's voice must have convinced her, because Evelyn leaned forward and said, "Tell me everything." So Funmi did. She told Evelyn the whole story from beginning to end, about diving into the ocean while everyone else stood frozen, about giving Michael CPR while he wasn't breathing, about Victoria stealing credit and destroying Funmi's life, about David Rose and his suspicions and his murder, about the poisoned coffee and Victoria's plan to marry Michael and kill him for his fortune. When she finished, Evelyn was silent for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "I never liked Victoria. There was always something wrong about her, something false, but Michael is blind to it. He thinks she's perfect." "She's been poisoning him," Funmi said. "That's why he has headaches and memory problems. That's why he can't think clearly anymore. She's slowly killing him, and once they're married, she'll finish the job." "Do you have proof of any of this?" Funmi's heart sank. The proof was destroyed. Victoria had the man who helped me killed, and she took back the coffee sample we tested. It's my word against hers now, and nobody believes a cleaner. "I believe you." Evelyn stood up and walked to the window, looking out at her garden. "I believe you because my son is dying in front of my eyes, and the doctors can't figure out why. I believe you because Victoria showed up in Michael's life like a hurricane, and ever since then, everything has gone wrong. And I believe you because a mother knows when her child is in danger. But what can we do? Victoria has covered her tracks perfectly. Even if we go to Michael and tell him the truth, he won't believe us. She's poisoned his mind along with his body." Evelyn turned around and there was fierce determination in her eyes. "Then we don't tell Michael. We set a trap for Victoria instead. We make her confess on her own terms." Over the next 2 days, Evelyn and Funmi planned carefully. Evelyn used her connections and her money to hire a private investigator, and the investigator dug into Victoria's past deeper than anyone had before. He found irregularities in Thomas Akin's death. He found suspicious financial transactions. He found 3 other men who had dated Victoria briefly before having mysterious accidents that sent them running. He found a pattern of manipulation and violence that stretched back 15 years. It still wasn't enough proof for the police, but it was enough to paint a picture. Evelyn also called in favors from journalists she trusted, and she arranged for them to be present at the Owen family mansion on a specific evening. She told Victoria that she wanted to host a small dinner party to celebrate the upcoming wedding, just close family and friends. Victoria couldn't refuse without seeming suspicious. The night of the dinner party arrived, and Funmi was terrified. She stayed hidden in a back room of the mansion with the private investigator and 2 journalists, watching everything through cameras that had been secretly installed. She watched Michael arrive looking thin and sick, leaning on Victoria's arm. She watched Victoria smile her fake smile and play the role of loving fiancée perfectly. During dinner, Evelyn made a toast. "To Michael and Victoria, may their marriage be long and prosperous." Then she added casually, "I've been thinking about the drowning incident, Michael. I'd love to hear Victoria tell the story again, it's so heroic." Victoria's smile didn't waver. "Oh, I've told that story so many times. I'm sure everyone's tired of hearing it." "I'm not," Evelyn said firmly. "Please indulge an old woman." So Victoria told the story again, describing in dramatic detail how she dove into the ocean and pulled Michael from the water and given him CPR until he breathed again. Michael held her hand throughout the story, looking at her with grateful, adoring eyes. When she finished, Evelyn said, "That's fascinating, because I spoke to someone who was actually there and they told me a very different version." Victoria's smile flickered for just a second. "I don't know what you mean." "I mean that a cleaning woman named Funmi Williams actually saved Michael's life. You just took credit for it after the fact." "That's ridiculous," Victoria said smoothly. "I saved Michael. Everyone knows that. This cleaning woman you mention must be confused or looking for attention." "Is she also confused about the poisoned coffee?" Evelyn asked quietly. The room went dead silent. Michael's head snapped up. "What?" "Mother, what are you talking about?" Michael's voice was confused and weak. "I'm talking about the fact that Victoria has been slowly poisoning you for months with thallium in your coffee. That's why you have headaches and memory problems. That's why you're dying." Victoria stood up and her face had gone cold and hard. "These are insane accusations. I won't sit here and listen to this." "Then listen to this," Evelyn said, and she nodded to someone in the back of the room. One of the journalists pressed a button, and suddenly a recording played through speakers. It was Victoria's voice from the phone call she'd made to Funmi 3 days ago. "David won't be going to the police tomorrow. There was a terrible car accident about 20 minutes ago. A truck driver fell asleep and crashed right into David's car. Such a tragedy. He died instantly. I did, and I have the coffee sample back now too. Michael will marry me, and then he'll have an unfortunate accident, and I'll inherit billions. Victoria's face went white, then red, then white again. "That recording is fake, it's been doctored." "I don't think so," said one of the journalists, stepping forward with his phone out and recording everything. "And I don't think the police will think so either, especially when they exhume Thomas Akin's body and test for thallium poisoning." Michael was staring at Victoria with dawning horror in his eyes. "Victoria, tell me this isn't true, tell me you didn't." Victoria looked at him, and for just a moment her mask slipped completely. Funmi saw pure cold calculation in those eyes, and she saw Victoria weighing her options. Fight or run, confess or lie. Victoria chose to run. She grabbed a steak knife from the table and lunged at Evelyn, moving faster than anyone expected. But Funmi had been watching through the cameras, and she'd been ready for exactly this moment. She burst through the door and threw herself between Victoria and Evelyn, and the knife that was meant for Michael's mother sliced across Funmi's arm instead. Pain exploded through her, but Funmi didn't stop. She grabbed Victoria's wrist and twisted hard, and the knife clattered to the floor. Security guards rushed in and pulled Victoria away while she screamed and fought like a wild animal. "You can't prove anything," Victoria shrieked. "I'll get the best lawyers, I'll destroy all of you." But Michael was staring at Funmi with recognition finally dawning in his eyes. "You," he whispered. "You were the one in the water, I remember your face. You saved me." Funmi clutched her bleeding arm and met his eyes. "Yes, Mr. Owen, I saved you, and I'd do it again." The police arrived within 10 minutes, and they arrested Victoria Akin for attempted murder, for conspiracy to commit murder, and eventually for the murder of David Rose and Thomas Akin. The journalists published their stories that very night, and by morning, Victoria's face was all over the news with headlines like "Billionaire's fiancé exposed as serial killer" and "The bride who poisoned for money." Michael spent 3 days in the hospital while doctors flushed the thallium from his system. Evelyn stayed by his side the entire time, and on the second day she brought Funmi to visit him. "I owe you everything," Michael said, and there were tears in his eyes. "You saved my life twice, once from the ocean and once from Victoria, and I repaid you by letting you get fired and destroyed." "You didn't know," Funmi said quietly. "Victoria was very good at what she did." "That's no excuse, I should have listened, I should have investigated." Michael reached for her hand. "I can't undo what happened to you, but I can try to make it right. I want to offer you a job, not as a cleaner. As the head of security and personnel for Owen Industries, your job will be to make sure nothing like this ever happens again, to protect people, to make sure the truth is heard." Funmi stared at him in shock. "Mr. Owen, I don't have the qualifications for." "You have the most important qualification. You have integrity, you have courage, and you care more about doing what's right than protecting yourself." Michael smiled weakly. "The salary is 3 million naira per year to start, plus a housing allowance and full benefits, and Grace's school fees will be paid through university." Funmi started crying. She couldn't help it. After months of poverty and desperation and fear, after losing everything and nearly losing her life, she was being offered salvation. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." "Don't thank me, you earned this 1,000 times over." 6 months later, Funmi stood in her new office on the 20th floor of Owen Industries. She had a nameplate on her door that read Funmi Williams, Head of Security and Personnel. She had a real salary and a real apartment, and Grace was back in school and thriving. Victoria Akin was in prison awaiting trial, facing multiple life sentences. The evidence against her had grown overwhelming once investigators started digging properly. They found proof of insurance fraud, embezzlement, and 3 murders including her husband's. Michael had recovered fully from the poisoning, and he'd become a different kind of CEO. More careful, more aware, more humble. He established a fund to help employees who were wrongly accused or mistreated, and he personally apologized to Funmi in front of the entire company. But the thing that made Funmi smile the most was the new policy she'd implemented on her first day as head of security. Every employee, from the CEO down to the newest cleaner, had to wear badges with their full names and photos. Everyone had to be visible. Everyone had to be seen. Because she'd learned the hard way that invisible people could be heroes, and visible people could be monsters, and the only way to tell the difference was to actually look. On Friday afternoon, Funmi walked through the building one last time before going home. She paused at the beach photograph hanging in the lobby, the one showing the company picnic before everything had gone wrong. She was in the background of that photo, just barely visible as she ran toward the water. Nobody had noticed her then. But everyone knew her name now. And that made all the difference. Justice had finally arrived, and with it, the proof that truth could survive even the darkest lies. One woman's courage had saved a life, exposed a killer, and proved that heroes come from the most unexpected places. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel and turn on your notification bell, so when next we drop a video, you'll be the first to know.